Imagine if your journey to work every day looked like this. For people with disabilities, this may as well be the case. In our exploration of vulnerable populations in streetscapes, we wanted to answer these questions. What is the current relationship of people with disabilities with San Jose streetscape? To what extent would autonomous vehicles impact the mobility of people with disabilities? How would that influence future infrastructure and design?
We defined our population as people of all ages who use mobility aids. Mobility aids include white canes, walking canes, guide dogs, wheelchairs, walkers, and anything else that the user requires to navigate the area and or maintain physical stability. We carried semi-structured interviews with 10 people. We observed transit centers and busy streets. We shadowed Otilia. We looked at "This is not accessibility" hashtag on Twitter. We researched how streetscapes evolved since before the ADA became law. We thought that we would find that autonomous vehicles would help lessen people with disabilities' risks of navigating streetscapes and thereby increasing their mobility. We found that people with disabilities generally perceive the built environment and public transit as unpredictable and difficult to navigate. This makes autonomous vehicles an option for people with disabilities to have more predictable, reliable, and safe trips from one place to another. We identified themed discussions on planning, predictability, and proximity. Getting from one place to another requires a great deal of planning. Among other things, a person with a disability needs to know about traffic, parking options, changes in transit schedules, locations of ramps, and types of terrain on the route. Visually impaired people must practice routes to destinations before being able to travel to them on their own. People with wheelchairs need to know the quality of the terrain on which they will roll. Bumpy areas can trigger chronic pain, spasms, exhaustion, and migraines to those whose eyes are forced to adjust. Also, the road sloping affects wheelchair users as they need to overcompensate with one side of their body in order to keep going straight. Even smaller bumps may pose fall risks to people with walkers who are unfamiliar with the terrain, as the walker can get caught on an unseen dip or crack. For people with disabilities who drive, getting the mobility aid in and out of the car can be a long process. Even without a mobility aid, long car trips can still pose a concern, as bumpy roads trigger chronic pain, or remaining still for long periods of time causes exhaustion. Informants who have issues with balance and body strength discussed how attempting to board a bus or truck with a high deck can feel unsafe. People who use power chairs and wish to travel by car are essentially restricted to paratransit since most privately owned vehicles are too small for their chairs. Even the destination itself may also require planning. For example, one of our informants who uses a walker requires a motorized cart to shop at a store and will be forced to leave if none are available. Ever-changing streetscapes often create new obstacles that may range from inconvenient to downright dangerous. Unforeseen obstacles, such as construction, can ruin a well-planned out, accessible, smooth, and relatively safe route. Walls and gates that cause people to change paths are unpredictable. Long walks, such as those from transit stops to final destination, may not be as simple as when using the privilege of walking with confidence. Anyone using wheels needs a flat, consistent terrain. Sudden dips in the sidewalk, road slopings, or lack of sidewalks will end that optional route and will challenge the person to be a creative yet safe explorer. A trip from a bus stop to a final destination can be too long for temperature-sensitive individuals who may overheat rapidly and potentially require hospitalization. Visually impaired people need additional and specific directions to find their journeys. Sadly, sometimes the most accessible path is also one that has no crosswalk or stop sign. Even short distance travels or trips can be dangerous for them if cars on the road do not slow down or stop to accord them priority. It is very important for people with disabilities to have drivers who follow traffic signs, stopping at stop signs or red lights. Changes in terrain or paths often put an end to a trip for a person with a disability.
The tweets from #ThisIsNotAccessibility shown throughout this video revealed how spaces designed to be accessible for people with disabilities end up being misused or blocked in some way. Spaces that were designed to be accessible or at least ADA compliant were sabotaged. The business owners or patrons used accessible spaces for storage or snow because they considered them to be not of use by them, people without disabilities, while forgetting that they are meant for use by people with disabilities. Over time, streetscapes have become more accessible through the implementation of curb ramps, traffic lanes, paved roads, crosswalk buttons, and larger sidewalks. Changes in streetscapes have taken into account the needs of cars as well as pedestrians. Autonomous vehicles integrate people with disabilities into these landscapes by providing another transportation option. They could travel to places that are difficult to navigate or not reached by public transit. Traveling in a car rather than a bus or paratransit vehicle gives people with disabilities more options for where to embark and disembark their transportation. People with disabilities can customize how their journeys start and end rather than risk navigating dangerous parking lots, long walks in the heat or cold, or buses and trains designed for people without disabilities. Increasing awareness of the ways in which people with disabilities benefit from autonomous vehicles could prompt efforts for further accessibility by fixing narrow, cracked, uneven sidewalks. All pedestrians would benefit from the latter, especially if they become less reliant on driving from place to place and more reliant upon fleets of autonomous vehicles. Since people are instrumental to caring for and guiding people with disabilities, attendants could accompany people with disabilities who travel in autonomous vehicles. The attendant could assist a person with a disability in embarking and disembarking from the vehicle, strapping in a wheelchair, or guiding a visually impaired person from the vehicle to the door. Autonomous vehicles would need to interact with people with disabilities on the streets. Right now, drivers use hand signals and eye contact to communicate with people with disabilities outside of cars, whether or not to cross in front of them. Some drivers run red lights and stop signs, drive around people with disabilities, or simply do not slow down for them. Autonomous vehicles would need to adapt to such unpredictable situations. We suggest further research into the unwritten culture of vehicle-pedestrian communication in order to investigate how autonomous vehicles would fit into these constructs while providing an avenue of travel for people with disabilities.